Let me move into speech. There's quite a bit going on that front. You have Elon Musk acquiring Twitter. It's causing a real panic on the American left that the conversation will broaden to a place that they don't like. Additionally, you've got the Biden administration announcing through DHS something called a disinformation governance board. The right has reacted with a lot of aggression to this, calling it pretty uniformly a ministry of truth. Although at this point, it looks like it hasn't quite gotten off the launch pad yet. Are you concerned about this disinformation governance board? And what do you make of sort of the left's handling of issues around free speech at this moment, brought more broadly?
Yeah, I'm extremely concerned about it, and it's probably, aside from my strong skepticism about the multi-pronged bullshit that was the Russiagate conspiracy theory, the objections I have, not just to the left, but to establishment liberalism's embrace of censorship and increasing levels of a censorship regime, both online and offline, is probably the thing that has caused a strong breach between people like myself and Matt Taibbi, and maybe kind of people associated with a sort of generational version of what left-wing politics had always represented, with this kind of newer iteration of left liberalism. I think that probably one of the most formative political events for me when I was really starting to become politically conscious and aware was the ACLU's representation in 1977 of the right of the American Nazi Party to march through Skokie, Illinois, even though Skokie was not just a heavily Jewish community, but one particularly filled with Holocaust survivors, people who were actually in camps. Remember, 1977 was only 30 years after the end of World War II. There were a lot of people who were in their teens or early 20s who were only in their 50s and 60s. There was a significant survivor population, and Skokie was one of the towns that became renowned for having them, and that's why the American Nazi Party wanted to walk through them. And the ACLU lawyers who defended the right of the American Nazi Party to march through Skokie, and who sued the city of Skokie for denying the marching permit, were mostly Jewish leftists. That has always been the old school ACLU. It came out of this tradition of Jewish leftism that believed in free speech, not only as a principle, like a philosophy or a value that drove the Enlightenment and the founding, but also as a political tactic, because their view was, which seems very obvious to me, though it is completely rejected now by most of the American left, that free speech is not a weapon, or censorship rather is not a weapon that the marginalized uses against the powerful. It's a weapon that the powerful uses against the marginalized. It's always people with marginalized views, dissidents and the like, who end up censored. And American Jews felt, as a marginalized minority in history in the United States, that it was vital to stand up at all times to any notion that the state or corporations had the right to dictate what we can and can't say based on self-interest. And they actually, people have forgotten this as well, had a lot of support at the time in that controversy and in their general free speech work from African-American civil rights leaders, who also knew that censorship would likely be used against their own movement. So for me, it was one of the most honorable things you could do to venerate a principle to such an extent. And they put their careers at risk. The ACLU was almost destroyed because obviously a lot of their donors were Jewish as well, were leftists as well, and they were so horrified that they abandoned the organization. It almost went bankrupt, and they pursued that case until the end because free speech was such a kind of guiding light, like a North Star of left-wing politics in the United States. And then in the West, Noam Chomsky, probably the most influential leftist intellectual, is a free speech absolutist and always has been. So to now watch the internet, which, is for me the most significant invention in my lifetime. It's, the reason why Edward Snowden risked his liberty
Thank you,
in order to, thank you, Al Gore, who invented it. But Edward Snowden, when I was trying to understand why he was willing to risk the rest of his life in a prison cell to defend the privacy on the internet, had said that for him as a child growing up in this kind of working class family, without a lot of economic means. The way he explored the world, he couldn't travel. He had no money to, go outside Virginia, was through the internet. And to protect the internet, this technology that was supposed to free us, liberate us from centralized state and corporate control, was the promise of the internet. And to watch it being converted instead to one of the most potent tools of surveillance and control, and now censorship, was sufficiently horrifying to him that he felt like it was a cause that he was willing to go to prison for. And that's how I feel as well, that, if you take the internet and you impose a censorship regime on it, then you're taking what had been the most liberatory tool, the most kind of empowering tool that had emerged in decades, and converting it into one of the most potent tools of repression. And it is being led entirely by this unholy union of the Democratic Party, the corporate media, and the U.S. security state. The U.S. security state is absolutely fixated on the need to preserve this censorship regime. You see it with the war in Ukraine. You saw it with COVID. It's always being implemented to advance and serve the interest of the United States government, of its foreign policy, of its health professionals, of its establishment, and to silence and eliminate all forms of dissent. And so for me, it's not just kind of an ancillary culture war issue that I'm in disagreement with some parts of the left. Any political movement that devotes itself to a censorship regime, to upholding and expanding it, and to eroding free speech values, is a movement that I'm going to regard as my adversary or even my enemy.